Hey everybody, John here with another episode of Have a Beer and Discuss. And I thought I'd try something different with this episode, a little bit of a different format. Instead of just getting drunk and winging it, I thought I'd try doing a little bit of preparation prior to it. So I thought this might be a little bit cleaner, just a little bit of a different way of doing things. So we'll see how that works out. The topic for today's video is, are Star Wars fans toxic? That's a claim that's been levied a lot since the kind of backlash, the fan backlash, after the release of The Last Jedi. So that being said, I'm going to sit here and enjoy my Miller Lite, and let's dive right in. Enjoy the video.
Solo, a Star Wars story, is just over a month away, but The Last Jedi is still a hot topic of conversation amongst critics, internet fan sites, and even executives at Lucasfilm. This is the movie that will just not go away, and not for good reasons. Since its release, The Last Jedi has been a divisive source of controversy, but particularly between fans and the critics and the corporate entities they seem so eager to please. Like any film, The Last Jedi had people who liked it as well as disliked it. The reason that is still being discussed is that the fans who did not respond well to the film have been labeled toxic by many critics, Hollywood creators, and executives. The contention is that the core fan base is too rabid to please, and anything new will be rejected. Further, these, quote, fanboys built up unrealistic expectations and predictions about the new film, and when it did not fulfill what they thought it should be, they began to act out. Both these claims are backwards. It is the Lucasfilm executive team, led by Kathleen Kennedy, the directors, and the critics who are exhibiting toxic behavior, and the blame for the expectations on story can be laid squarely at the feet of inept storytelling. First of all, it's imperative to define the term toxic. Recently, the term has been applied to anyone who has an attitude or opinion that a particular establishment does not agree with. The term carries an obvious negative connotation, so I can slap this term on an opinion and suddenly that opinion seems harmful, whether that's the truth or not. Since my argument is that Kennedy and her cronies are the toxic bunch, I feel it's not only fair, but in the best interest of honesty, to have a hard definition in the term or for the term for this piece. According to my dictionary, toxic means poisonous, and I think that's an appropriate definition for what we see going on in the Star Wars franchise right now. So let's begin at the beginning, or rather at the ending. At the beginning of the ending, when the reviews for The Last Jedi started coming out. The critical reaction to The Last Jedi was overwhelmingly positive. In fact, it was difficult, if not impossible, to find a review with a negative thing to say about the film. It checked all the right boxes. It was new, fresh, upbeat, progressive, and all the other right buzzwords. However, something was wrong. The Rotten Tomatoes user ratings came in at just 54%, a far cry from the 92% aggregate critic score on the same site. What could this mean? What could possibly cause such a huge disparity between the critic score and average user score of the film? The answers provided for this mystery served as the opening salvo in what has become an all-out war. Battle lines were drawn, with mainstream critics, Lucasfilm, and Hollywood elites on one side, and longtime Star Wars fans on the other. The first explanation for the difference was that alt-right hacker bots were being used to negatively influence the Rotten Tomatoes user score. Rotten Tomatoes themselves denied this, however, but this was the initial explanation that was used by most critics, including sites such as Polygon and Variety. So to stick to the battle analogy, the initial shot was fairly innocuous. People who didn't like this movie simply don't exist. There's some sort of conspiracy theory because everyone who saw the movie had to have liked it. What this does show, though, is an inability to recognize that the film was not as objectively good as the industry wanted to believe it was. The Rotten Tomatoes user score seems fair to me. I saw the movie with one other person. He liked it, I did not. 50%. Suddenly, an industry is telling half the people who saw the film they actually liked it. I'm no genius, but I can definitely remember not liking this movie, and so did a lot of other people who saw it. The Star War intensified from here. As the year moved on, Lucasfilm began to accept that people, and a lot of people, really did not like The Last Jedi. As a sort of damage control, director J.J. Abrams was brought back in to write and direct the final episode of the series. After all, this was supposed to be his story, so why not? In February, JJ fired the second volley, one that I think started or at least escalated the online movements we see now, the calls for boycott, the unbridled hatred. He stated that fans who didn't like The Last Jedi held that opinion because they felt threatened by the female characters. He went on to quote that when you're privileged, equality feels like oppression, and this movie is about fairness. In this small interview, he unveiled exactly what is wrong with Lucasfilm in its current state. You are not allowed to not like this movie. This statement was an admission of the agenda that was paramount in the making of the films, and a rejection of any portion of these movies is seen as tantamount to a rejection of this agenda. This is a level of arrogance and ego unseen before, even in Hollywood. This group of people is so incapable of taking criticism they have shifted the fight to moral terms. Unlike other films, it has been deemed inappropriate to dislike this movie due to the social messaging it contains. The executives at Lucasfilm clearly feel they have the entire fan base backed into a moral corner where they are required to like the film because any other response than positive is an attack on women, diversity, and humanity as a whole. Lucasfilm has become so incapable of taking any criticism that it's gotten to the point of the absurd. If you don't like their film, it's not because there's something wrong with it, it's because there's something wrong with you. And not just with your aesthetics, there's something wrong with you morally. As you can imagine, the Star Wars fanbase has taken umbrage with these claims, and many have raised their proverbial banners in opposition. Sites such as Geeks and Gamers and the World Class Bullshitters, both of whom I recommend highly, have seen huge bumps in their subscriber bases post The Last Jedi's release. Both are extremely critical of the film. I do not believe their increased viewership is a result of them influencing opinions, but rather they are reinforcing what so many are already thinking. No one else in the mainstream has the courage to speak the truth, so the public is flocking to these honest brokers. However, instead of welcoming new opinions and voices into the marketplace, the mainstream, places like Collider, John Campea, etc., have called such voices and opinions toxic. Ironically, the only reason these sites have such influence now is because the mainstream reviewers refuse to honestly review the film. It's because more than half the people who saw the film did not like it. The Rotten Tomatoes score is now under 50%. Yet, we are told by Disney that it was good. We are told by Lucasfilm that if we did not like it, we are morally bankrupt. As a result, fans went where they could hear a voice like theirs, where they would not have their character called into question for holding an opinion on a movie. These, quote, toxic fanboys were the result of the abhorrent behavior from Disney, Lucasfilm, and mainstream critics. The second part of the equation is the idea that somehow Star Wars fans ruined the new film with expectations and fan theories. When The Last Jedi did not deliver on these expectations, it created an army of angry trolls hell bent on destroying what was a really great movie. Normally, I would agree that fans have no business in dictating how a story is told. Not in this case, though. The reason is that Episode 7 was not a complete story. It intentionally left important elements of the story out specifically to tease fans. The intent was to generate conversation amongst fans between the two films, to keep people talking, perhaps even theorizing about the various mysteries that J.J. Abrams had dangled in front of our faces. The problem narratively is that Episode 7 required Episode 8 to complete it. When it did not deliver on a single point, Episode 8's vast narrative shortcomings not only ruined The Last Jedi, but also The Force Awakens. That's the price you pay for poor storytelling. In no way was the reaction from the fans unjustified, particularly in the case of Rey's parentage. I know people liked The Sixth Sense when it came out, but tricking people does not equal good storytelling. However, the army of critics were there to rush to Rian Johnson's defense. It's not that he wrote a bad script that threw out all the narrative threads from the previous unfinished story, it's that the fanbase is toxic and they ruined the film. The worst part is that many of the sites saying that fan theories ruined the film were the worst offenders of theorizing about it in the 2-year lead up. Collider, I'm looking at you. It is clear that Kennedy, her cabal of directors, and the critics so desperate for an invite to the next premiere have displayed some pretty toxic behavior. But taking the definition from earlier, what exactly are they poisoning? They're poisoning the very thing that many of them derive their livelihoods from, the Star Wars brand. There's a reason that brand was seen by Disney executives as a golden goose. That reason is the quote fanboys Kennedy and her cronies so despise. The toxic fanboys are the reason the brand had such perceived value. It was assumed that they would continue to consume anything with a Star Wars label on it. These are, or rather were, the people going to see the films 10 times or more in theaters. They were the ones buying the toys, purchasing the books, lining their shelves with comics, and buying the Blu-ray and then the special editions when they came out. These were the people who provided the bulk of the guaranteed revenue for the product, and yet these are the people that Kennedy insists that Lucasfilm does not need. Well, Kathleen, you're now the captain of a $4 billion sinking ship, and you're the one who put all of the holes in it. but all you want to do is point fingers and blame everybody else for your failures. Unless Kathleen Kennedy and her entire team and this attitude is removed, Star Wars is going to die. And not because of fanboys, but because of Disney's gross misunderstanding of the brand combined with unbridled arrogance. Truly a toxic combination.
Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, whether you agreed or disagreed. Till next time, for God's sakes, think for yourself.